Before we get to McShay, I just want to share a few thoughts that I have on the AFC, NFC championship games. You've heard me say it a million times. It's just my favorite NFL weekend. Everything that's on the line, the teams that you forget that lose in these, the teams that play in the Super Bowls that we almost never forget. And the first game had all sorts of legacy stuff hanging out there, which actually felt somewhat relevant for the first time in a long time. It's kind of rare when you're like, actually, these legacy updates may actually matter. And then we had a great game between Detroit and San Francisco. It was kind of fun to see everybody feel like they were rooting for Detroit. I felt incredibly wrong for good chunks of that game. We'll get to it. San Francisco's down 24-7 at the half. Detroit has the football. They're up 24-10. It's a 4th and 2 at San Francisco's 28. They go for it, and you have the Josh Reynolds drop. And that starts the Dan Campbell saga, second-guessing throughout last night and into much of this week. So that was the first one that I had a hard time with. But let's look at all the numbers. I can just tell you how I felt in the moment because I'm like, man, you're about to go up 3 scores at San Francisco, a little deeper into the third quarter. You start playing the possession game in here a little bit. They're the number 1 seed in the NFC. You get to go up 3 scores against them, but that's not who the Lions have been. And we know this with analytics, right? You can't date them, you marry them. It's the same as playing blackjack. You're playing every hand. You can't play the numbers and then play feel and combine the entire thing to get the benefits of the math of it. So I understand that. We've talked about it plenty of times. So let's look at some of those numbers. The last 2 seasons, Detroit is 70% conversion rate of 4th downs between 2 and 3 yards. Okay. The league average is 52%. They're really good at it and have been for a couple years. We talked about the games in Campbell's career why he went up against the Chargers and was like, I'm going for it, because the game against the Vikings, he was so upset, being like, let's decide it on the field. And this is who he's been the entire time. And it was kind of fun too. Lions are this incredible underdog story. You got people who've never cared about Detroit rooting for them because they'd had that much of a drought. And any fan from any of these other depressed areas are like sympathetic towards it. Maybe just don't like the Niners, right? But you get the point. There was like a lot of neutral support for the Lions. So more people were invested in Lions games yesterday probably than they ever have been. So I like the going up 17. Then we have to ask about the kicker, Michael Badgley. So he was with the Lions for 4 games in the regular season after they got rid of the other guy. He was 1-1 between 40 and 49 yards in the regular season. He was 13 of 15 on extra points. He'd hit 1 50-yarder all season long, and that was the 54-yarder against the Rams in the playoffs indoors. He is 8 of 16 outdoors. So you can't assume that he's just going to make it. But what I don't like is the assumption that going for it is assuming a lot of other things as well. Be like, hey, you can't assume he's going to make the kick. Well, I probably should be able to assume that Josh Reynolds is going to catch it, and he didn't. And he drops the pass on 4th and 2. So again, I'd rather go up 3 scores. A lot of what I just shared with you tells you that I'm still wrong, despite the game that I was playing in my head, which I start to do in the second halves of games that are close or not even close, is like, okay, we got to play the possession game here. Because if you're going up 3 scores on the road against the number 1 seed in the NFC, you're looking at the projected possessions and how many times San Francisco is going to get the football back. They're probably only going to get it back 3 or 4 times. They got it back 4 times. So that would mean in the next 4 possessions, they're going to have to score 17 points just to tie us. And at that point, San Francisco hadn't been able to do any of that stuff on offense. Well, they scored 24 points in the next 4 possessions. You got the fumble. And at that point, you're like, man, if they had fumbled and given up a touchdown on a 24-yard drive, they could still be up and maybe mentally reset now. But see, the whole point of this argument is no matter what side you're on, you're just kind of assuming the outcome is better for the decisions that you wanted to make. So the next field goal I had no issue with because it was going to be really deep. That one was going to be, I think, a 57-yarder on the 4th and 3 from San Francisco's 30. And the one I think there's really no debate, and has nothing to do with analytics, is just a mistake. 3rd and goal, you've got to keep your timeouts. You've got to be able to stop the clock. You got to get a 3 and out. You don't want to have to go to the onside kick. 3rd and goal, they decided to run it. Maybe they got a look they liked. I don't know if that's the right call against San Francisco, although some numbers would tell you it's the right call and you're kind of switching it up. Everybody's expecting a pass. These guys wouldn't run. They have to preserve their timeouts. There's no way they're going to do that. They're going to pass, catch them off guard, get in. Well, they get stuff. They have to burn the time out, and then that changes everything with the clock game that you're playing the rest of the way, because now you have to kick an onside kick, which success rate's around 4%. And you got to do it with Kittle on the other side. You know that guy's just going to recover it if he has a chance to make a play on the ball. And so we're left here with like, hey, all the stuff we liked about Campbell doesn't mean he was wrong all the time. We're really results driven. We constantly count stuff. We don't add much to it. And that's why in the moment I'll ask myself with every decision, do I like this one or do I not like this one? I don't think because Campbell has done this all season long that means that every time he does it just means it's right. So I push back on that a little bit. You want to tell me the kicker was part of the issue? You want to tell me that their numbers in 4th and 2 and 3 are really, really good, and they are better than everybody else? I guess in the NFC Championship, I would rather just go up 17 points on San Francisco knowing they need 17 in 4 possessions, despite the fact they put up 24 in 4 possessions and won the game. Shanahan, entering the Green Bay game, was 0-30 with San Francisco trailing by 5 points or more entering the 4th quarter. He finally gets that win against Green Bay. This game actually didn't even count because they weren't trailing by 5 or more going into the 4th. And yet it's another game where it's like, well, Shanahan actually, look, he's probably due. It's a bit like the Harden playoff thing. You're like, can't believe it's going on this long. But like, he has to be due. But if you hated Shanahan, you were loving it. Incapable of making adjustments. Now the script is out. But if you look at what they were doing in the second half, it looked like they actually got back to script a little bit more with the Debo stuff. They also got really lucky. The fumble, the Ayuk stuff, none of the 4th down decisions working out for Campbell. And Purdy, who, you know, people are like, this dude was supposed to be the MVP. Now, granted, Lamar had just had his game previously, and he's going to win the MVP, but you get the point. It's like, what? And I still have moments of like, is he going to be the guy like back there for 10 years? I don't think the Garoppolo comparisons are close. I think Purdy's a smarter quarterback. And his legs, he did stuff yesterday with his legs. He had 3 huge runs in the second half that you could argue offensively was what allowed them to clinch the game. So Shanahan gets one. Everyone felt like they were on Detroit's side. I will admit, when they were up big, I'm like, are you going to get any of these games? Because I figured, well, look, with Sutton and Vildor at corner and the numbers and how bad they've been, it's like, yeah, but that's not really where they threw. And for all the defensive line names, I'm like, where are they? Detroit's O-line was the story the first 30-plus minutes of this game. And I know Campbell afterwards said we're likely, I'm paraphrasing it a bit, so I don't want to get it word for word, but he was incredibly honest saying how hard it was going to be going into next year. They have drafted as well as any team in the league the last couple of years. Goff, who I've never been a fan of, I have to admit that he's good enough, right? He's good enough to get you in the mix. And I love that last touchdown because he was trying to make sure they moved the ball quick enough to at least get a chance at the end, where other quarterbacks are like, cool, free yardage, and I'm going to get a touchdown, and my stats are going to look good. It's like, no, the game is still on the line here. So I like that kind of stuff, the development of Gibbs, Laporta. I could just keep naming a million names. But yeah, there's a moment when they're up big, and I'm going, what is San Francisco? Like, because it was going to be fraud alert for them. You're like, wait, this team that destroys other good teams, it's like, wait, they're frauds. They're all frauds too. Like, okay, big fraud fest here in the NFL, but that was big time stuff. Not many teams would be able to come back down that many points in the NFC Championship game. All right, let's get to off the theme of thinking you're wrong at points. I can't believe I picked against Mahomes 2 weeks in a row. I don't envision a scenario where that will ever happen again. I'm not going to say I'm never, ever going to pick against him the rest of the career. That would be somewhat bold in 2024, knowing we're probably going to be doing this for a while. But back-to-back weeks, I had Niners-Bills before the season started, the Super Bowl, so maybe that leaked in there a little bit. A little bit of the Bills' time. It's their time. And then after the Mahomes win, I was like, don't pick against him this week. Don't pick against him. Little film breakdown, reading stuff, going around, changed my mind a million times. And then I picked Baltimore because I just felt like this is going to be a completely different challenge after the lack of help from Miami and Buffalo's defense. It's not my least favorite move. To this day, worst pick of my career, I think. Well, the one I hate the most, and look, I've been doing this a long time, so I got some doozies, but it's walking out of Bryant-Denny Stadium in 2011, November 5th. LSU wins 9-6 against number 1 LSU, number 2 Alabama, 9-6 overtime win. And I left. Stanford Steve and I went to watch LSU fans sing "Fuck You, Alabama." And we're walking down the strip there, and I was like, I will not pick LSU if they have a rematch for the national championship. I will not. Make sure I don't pick them. And he was like, I agree with you. And I was like, all right. And then I think we talked about whether or not Stanford and Andrew Luck would have more than 9 points for about a half an hour and 3 Coors Lights. So the point was, is I was determined to not pick LSU if there was a rematch. Well, I get down to New Orleans for the national championship game. I'm hanging out a little bit because I'm on, wipe me down, right? And I'm just like, LSU has a chance to put together the greatest season ever in the history of college football. They can beat this Bama team twice. And I pick LSU. And they don't cross midfield, pretty much. And Fowler's like, hey, did you pick LSU in the rematch? We're out later that night. I go, yeah. He goes, what was it? What was it, Brian? The voodoo? The voodoo get in your system? Just the voodoo in the air? And I was like, gas tank on E, all drinks on me, Chris. I don't know what to tell you. I think it was the voodoo. And I was pissed about it. I'm not as pissed about this, but I feel some regret. But let's talk about Baltimore's defense before we get to the other big topic after this game. I love Kyle Hamilton. As an aside, I'm allowed to love him in a loss. I love him. I love him. I love him. All right, there's nothing else to say. Baltimore's defense, they held Kansas City to 5 straight punts in the second half. Starting the second half, Kansas City going up against them, punt, 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 and then a knee after the conversion. Spare me, that was by design because they knew they were up and trying to run clock. Nobody tries to run clock the first possession, second possession, likely third possession of the second half. You want possession 4 or 5? All right, maybe I'll give it to you. But that was not by design. That's how great Baltimore's defense was. But because Baltimore's defense was so great, maybe overshadowing a bit the Kansas City's defense is also incredible. Those defensive backs are nasty. They've done a really good job with this. We've talked about how young they are, reinventing themselves on the defensive side of the ball, and this is even close to being what the other defenses were with Mahomes the whole time. So they deserve their flowers as well. But in the first half, it wasn't that I thought Lamar. Here we go. We're talking Lamar. I didn't think it was that he was bad. I just thought it was a lack of opportunity. Kansas City had the first 2 drives of their game take up almost a quarter of game clock, 14:47. You've got the fumble, you've got the great escapes from Lamar, you've got the 4th down run, the catch to himself, but he had only 5 completions, including the one to himself in the first half. But I wasn't, at no point in the first half was like, Lamar's not playing well. Just feel like, dude, they don't have the football. It's a lack of opportunities. But then in the second half, I thought he was pretty bad. Kansas City's defense held the MVP to 3 points over 8 possessions, not including the end-of-half possession. Baltimore was 3-11 on third down. Lamar had some tip balls at the line of scrimmage would happen, but also some tip balls and throws out to the flat that didn't make a lot of sense. Chris Jones had one. Felt like there were 2 significant misses to the sideline. He missed every deep shot except for the blown coverages on the Zay Flowers touchdown and the Zay Flowers huge gain, where then he got penalized for taunting. We could talk penalties here, but I don't think penalties necessarily change everything unless you want to talk about the interception in the end zone, which I think was early contact, but at the same time, it's a terrible, terrible throw by Lamar into triple coverage. So the interception was awful. The numbers now for his playoff career are not great, but as I'll remind you again, I don't like saying that because someone hasn't won anything, they're incapable of winning it. I think I've done it with probably like less than 5 NBA players since I've been on the air, where I'll just say, I do not think that person can win. And yet they probably still could if things happen, right? I don't like saying it with quarterbacks because we've seen quarterbacks that are average at best find a way to be playing in the Super Bowl, if not randomly winning it every now and then. So even if I don't like somebody, it doesn't mean that they're an impossibility. But there was a lot of conversation this week about who Lamar was after Josh Allen lost to Patrick Mahomes. And I really didn't want to get involved. I didn't know that, you know me, I don't really get into it on social media with people despite seeing some of the stuff. I'm like, what the fuck is this conclusion? And I thought about doing an open, and I was like, you know what, just gear up for the AFC Championship thing here. Because if you're picking Josh Allen over Lamar right now, you know, in some circles, people ask you where you are on January 6th. But the numbers are just not debatable to this point. You know, Lamar's drop-off is significant in these 6 playoff games. Completion percentage goes from 65 to 57. Yards per attempt drops more than a yard. The QB rating goes from 98 to like 76. Interception percentage goes to 2 to 3. The yards per attempt goes down as well. Lamar's QBR generally sits at the last 3 of the 4 years in the 60s. He's got one in the 50s. His MVP season, the QBR was 83, which prior to this season man, I got shit for this basically from Ravens fans, but I was like, that's the outlier year. Like his MVP year statistically is kind of like fluky compared to who he's been. And then he's going to win the MVP again this year. So, at one point, one of the lessons maybe in this season was Lamar had 0 attempts trailing by more than 8 points all year long. So did we have to see a version of him yesterday that we actually didn't have to see all season long? And that's where the real truth is told about quarterbacks. That seems to be a fair question, but also pretty conclusive. And I'm just not there yet with it. But when it comes back to the Allen part of it, like Allen has a 100 rating in the playoffs. His interception percentage is 1. He has a 21-4 touchdown interception split with a 5-5 record. Lamar's 2-4 with a 6 touchdown, 6 interception ratio. That's his split in the playoffs. Allen had the 4 touchdown, 390 total yard game at Kansas City 2 years ago in the overtime loss. Lamar's never had a game even close to that. Not even close. But I think the bigger lesson in all of this is that Mahomes is going to get us talking about maybe a Burrow, although Burrow got him once, Allen, who he's beaten 3 of the last 4 years, and now Lamar's season, which is ended by Mahomes for the first time, which is probably going to happen again with how good this dude is. Like we're just start looking at some of these guys like Ewing, Karl Malone, Stockton, Drexler, and my man Charles Barkley. That might be it. That might be the lesson, at least as of right now, that Mahomes is just ending all of these dudes' seasons while we keep arguing about who's better after him.